Good afternoon and welcome to everybody. My name is Taylor Archer and I would like to welcome you all to our very first and very exciting live webinar of 2025. On behalf of Kaelo, I would like to wish you all the best for the year ahead and we look forward to our continuous engagements with you all. Whether you are looking to improve your personal connections, deepen your understanding of healthy communication, or explore the complexities of romantic partnerships, you've come to the right place. With February being known as the month of love, our goal today is to provide you with valuable insights, practical tips, and to open the floor to meaningful engagements that will help strengthen your relationships in all aspects of your life. We encourage you to ask questions, share thoughts, and engage actively throughout the session. Without further ado, it is my absolute privilege to introduce our expert facilitator today, Tracy Helps, who is a highly skilled clinical social worker with a wealth of experience with helping individuals, couples, and families navigate through the complexities of relationships. Thank you, Tracy, for joining us today. I will now hand over to you. Enjoy, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for that introduction and thanks for having me with you today. I hope that we can have a conversation. So please feel free to post all your questions, your insights, or suggestions in that chat box and let's be as interactive as possible. I will stop from time to time to allow for questions, but also please feel free just to drop them in that chat box. My colleagues will assist me in filtering those through if I'm unable to see them all or catch them all. So please feel free to go ahead and drop those in as we go through. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about relationships. But relationships are more than just you and your partner. Relationships are much broader than that. And they really do start with a healthy relationship with ourselves. Without that, we are going to find relationships with other people very, very challenging and also quite possibly unsuccessful. So let's have a look at how do we start to build that meaningful relationship with ourselves. What are some of our blind spots potentially? And then some of the sort of tricks and tips of the trade in terms of supporting great relationships in families, whatever that might look like for you. Bearing in mind that we all define family differently, and this might include extended families or really good friends or even colleagues. Some of the communication ideas that can be helpful, and then, of course, maintaining that. It's super easy to have an awesome relationship for those first 3 months. That love hormone is buzzing through us, and it's all about candlelights and chocolates and flowers and romance. And then at some point, around about a couple months in, that starts to wear off. And then unfortunately, or fortunately perhaps, the hard work starts and relationships get real. So how do we maintain that connection for a number of time? Now, just to really highlight for a minute how important this is and why we're focusing on relationships and connection and attachments perhaps. These are your 5 cornerstones of well-being: learning, taking notice, giving, being active, and of course, connecting. Now, we knew this prior to the COVID pandemic. We knew that connection was integral to human well-being. We know that we are social creatures, that we can't actually survive by ourselves. And we're going to speak a little bit about attachment later and how we understand the importance of that human bond. But we know that hundreds of years ago, we used banishment as one of the ultimate punishments. If you committed a serious enough crime, you were banished from the community, and that was considered to be a heinous punishment. So we know that connection is fundamental to our well-being, and we cannot actually be physically or emotionally well if we don't have good connections. So maybe that's why we're talking about this today. Just to reinforce that a little bit more, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, certainly not new. This has been around for as long as the mountains, perhaps. But we can see that love and belonging is there on that third layer. So the only things before that are our physiological needs: air, water, food, shelter, those things that keep us physically alive. Obviously, we need those first. Then we have a look at our safety needs, employment and resources and health and a place to live and those sorts of things. And many would argue, perhaps myself included, that love and belonging might even come before safety needs. The more we start to understand the neurology of the human being, the more we start to understand how critically important the sense of belonging really is. And that can come from lots of different places. So many of you might be thinking, I'm not in a romantic partnership. That's really not what we're talking about. We're talking about human connections and human bonds that might include a romantic relationship, but it might also be about friendship, feeling like a part of your team at work, feeling like part of the tribe at the running club, or whatever your contexts are, whatever your tribes, so to speak, are. We have to have that connection. Without that, building any kind of sense of esteem, self-respect, believing our own status, having a strong sense of self is nearly impossible. And certainly it's impossible to self-actualize, which would be building that dream life and really maximizing our potential. Without that basic connection, we're really going to struggle to do that. We know that just giving another human being a hug reduces our blood pressure immediately. There are very few things in life that have an immediate impact on our well-being, but social connection, belonging, and attachment is certainly one of them. So let's just have a last look at the value of connection and why it is so important to prioritize this in your life. Lots of you might be thinking, I've been hurt by relationships in the past. Certainly you probably have. You might be thinking, do I really want to put myself out there again? Do I want to trust friends or partners or colleagues? Do I really want to trust them again? Is it worth it? Is it worth the effort? Is it worth the potential heartache? And the answer is a resounding yes. It absolutely is worth it, because it gives us that sense of belonging. It gives us that sense of being loved and cared for and valued. Obviously, this is the right relationships. If you're in relationships that are perhaps a bit toxic, they're certainly not going to leave you feeling loved and cared for and valued. So we're talking about the right relationships, and hopefully we'll shed some light on that a bit more today. We know that we have improved mental and physical health. If we look back on the COVID pandemic, was it the virus that did the most damage, the actual virus, or was it the social isolation? You know, for people like me who work in the space of mental health, we are still absolutely dealing with the fallout from COVID, the mental health fallout, the increase in addictions, in depression, in anxiety, in domestic violence. All of these things increased through the COVID pandemic, not because of the virus, but because of the isolation. And we understand more now than ever before the value of human connection and the impact that it has on our physical health. Now, this goes as far as to say, when a baby is born, when a human baby is born, it's completely defenseless. Other mammals have other survival strategies. So buck are able to stand up and run pretty quickly. Other mammals have defense mechanisms. Human beings have none. We are completely helpless at the moment of birth. If you think back a couple hundred years ago, our physical survival was dependent on that attachment to another human being, dependent on that connection. If our mothers didn't attach to us, if they abandoned us, that was pretty much the end of our lives. So we know how wired in, how instinctive, how neurological that drive for human connection is. Without it, our neurological pathways actually don't develop properly, and we have stunted development, not just in childhood, but all the way through our lives. We know that human connection protects us against serious illness and even disease. If you have good enough support, you will live longer. And one of the great ironies in research is that a number of years ago, they did some research into people who were married as opposed to people who were not. What they found out initially was that if you were married, you tended to live longer than if you were not married. Then a decade or two later, they did that again in a slightly more sophisticated way. And they researched men and women separately. And what they came out with, ironically, on the second round was that marriage is good for men. So married men will live longer than married women, but married men will live longer than single men, but married women perhaps live shorter than single women. So a little bit of a twist thrown into that research. And I'd love to see your comments on that in the chat box on what that might mean for you. But with those good enough attachments, we live longer and healthier lives. We also have increased happiness and just a general sense of well-being. So I hope this drives home the absolute importance of connection, attachment, belonging, and good enough relationships. And you'll notice all along that I've been saying good enough relationships. There's no such thing as a perfect relationship. We speak about a good enough parent, a good enough relationship, a good enough friend. We are all going to make mistakes. We are all going to drop the ball and let people that we care about down. And that's okay. If that basic attachment and connection is in place, our relationships can restore. They can rupture, they can break, but they can also restore if those initial connections are strong enough to start with. So I hope you understand the value of connection. Are there any questions or comments or insights at this time before I move on? Okay, so I see one saying, does this mean marriage is not conducive for the health of women? Yes, tentatively, yes. So what they found is that unmarried men don't look after themselves particularly well. So they tend to eat badly, drink too much alcohol, stay up too late at night, do all these slightly reckless things. And please forgive me, I'm absolutely generalizing, of course. And unmarried women tend to look after themselves and not do as many silly things. But when we get married, women tend to look after their husbands, often at the expense of themselves. Again, generalizing hugely. So we find that women's health is actually worse in marriage than their husband's health. Obviously, again, being general, not meaning any offense to anybody, and I'd love to hear your arguments back on that. Okay. Great. So many comments coming in. I'm sure my colleagues are going to give me a summary of those in a minute because I'm not going to be able to keep up. But thank you so much for all of those coming in. I'm so glad to hear from all of you. So let's start with the beginning of this whole thing, and that's a relationship with yourself. We are actually unable to have meaningful, healthy, sustainable connections if we don't first have a healthy connection with ourselves. If I don't know myself, if I don't know what's important to me, if I don't know what I want, how am I able to have a healthy relationship? And often what we find is that my damage, whatever that might be, attracts somebody else's damage, whatever that might be, and we form this very tight connection. But it's unfortunately based on my damage and your damage. It's not based on my wellness and your wellness. And those relationships can often be quite toxic, controlling, abusive, short-lived, really intense, but not necessarily what we're looking for in our lives. So when we're able to focus on ourselves first and perhaps resolve some issues and do some work on ourselves, then we're much better positioned to have a more meaningful and sustainable relationship with anybody else. So what does that look like? It starts with self-care. If I am not able to prioritize my well-being, if I'm not able to look after myself on all of these different levels, again, when I say self-care, people tend to think of, having a long hot bath and a glass of wine and a piece of chocolate. And certainly that is part of self-care. Taking leave, hanging out with your friends and family, this is all self-care. But it also exists beyond that. It exists physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, environmentally, socially, and financially. Am I able to prioritize myself and look after myself in all of these areas? Excuse me. And this may include things like having a budget that allows me to not be completely stressed. That is self-care. It might be reserving money for things that are important to me, not just prioritizing everybody else all of the time. Emotionally, perhaps it's on focusing on gratitudes, working out what your triggers are, engaging in a counseling or journaling or reading process to start to come to understand what your triggers might be. And I'm going to have a look at that a bit later as well. Spiritually, do we take time out to just be by ourselves, to connect, to whatever our higher power might be, the universe, just to be still, to be outdoors, to be in nature. Is our environment one that's conducive to our well-being? I know that for myself, but also research tells us there's a direct correlation between kind of mess in your house and levels of anxiety. The messier things get, the more anxious we feel. So self-care is actually being able to tidy up your space and maintain that. And certainly in my life, when my space starts to get chaotic, I don't do well. I become incredibly anxious. Intellectually, we know that continual learning is a cornerstone for well-being, but are we doing that? Are we reading things that are interesting to us, studying something a little bit further? Do we have hobbies that engage us and interest us? So these are all the different areas of self-care. There's a wonderful movie called Runaway Bride, which those of you that are old enough will have probably seen before, with Richard Gere and Julia Roberts. And it's a wonderful movie to understand what I'm saying here and what I'm going to keep saying through this presentation. If we don't know ourselves, if we don't know what we like, we're always going to put ourselves into our partner's life. We're going to immerse ourselves into their life. And I really want you to watch that movie in the next couple of days or so. I'm sure you'll find it on Netflix or somewhere easily. It's a very popular, pretty famous movie. And if you even watched it before, I want you to watch it again through this lens. What she does is she keeps immersing herself in the life of her partner, and then realizing, excuse me, realizing at the very last minute that actually that isn't who she is or what she wants. And then she kind of runs away at the last moment. So I won't spoil the movie, but just watch it through this lens and start to apply it to your own life. Are you prioritizing what you need and what you want first? Are you able to give yourself this self-care? Do you even know what it is that you like and what you want? The next aspect here is setting healthy boundaries. If I'm not able to protect my time, my energy, my money, my choices, if I'm not able to set boundaries around those things, then people are going to just take what they want and do as they please. And that is never going to be a place from which I'm able to protect myself or really prioritize myself. So setting those healthy boundaries is absolutely paramount. No, I don't have capacity to do that. No, I'm not interested in doing this with you. No, thank you. Yes, please. Whatever it is that you need to be boundarizing. And that's usually resources, time, energy, money, where you put your priorities. Those boundaries are absolutely about building that relationship with yourself first. I have to be the most important relationship. When we look at families and we talk about helping children, anybody who spent 5 months as a social worker, as a teacher, as a therapist will know that to help the child, you have to help the parent. We have to be okay first. If I'm not okay, my relationships can't be okay. My romantic partnerships, my friendships, my parenting relationships, I have to be okay first. And that means setting those boundaries. It also means cultivating that self-compassion. And people often say to me in a therapy context, isn't self-compassion just self-pity? No, it's not. It's very, very different. If we're wallowing in self-pity, that's a case of, why is this happening to me? It's so unfair. It shouldn't be happening. And kind of holding on to that and really wallowing in it. That is self-pity. And that is disempowering and doesn't move us forward at all. But self-compassion is very different. Self-compassion is acknowledging, okay, there have been some tough things that have happened in my life for whatever reason, and I understand and appreciate the impact those things have had on me. I appreciate that I might still be carrying some of that impact, carrying those implications. They might have become triggers for me. That's self-compassion, understanding why we are where we are, giving ourselves some grace, some understanding, as we would for somebody else. When somebody else goes through something, we're able to give them compassion and say, okay, we understand why you are where you are. We need to be able to give ourselves that very same compassion. Then we talk about developing a healthy inner dialogue. When I listen to my patients describe to me the narratives that happen in their heads, the way that they speak to themselves in their heads, it's really not okay. there is no way that I would speak to somebody else in that way, that I would call them those kinds of names or belittle or degrade or criticize another person in the same way as people's internal dialogues criticize and belittle them. So a big part of this is developing that healthy dialogue. And maybe we use affirmations for that, and I'll show you some suggestions in a second. Maybe we just start to catch ourselves. Every time we're about to say something negative about ourselves in our head, we stop and we go, okay, let me practice some self-compassion. Let me turn that around and come to it with grace and understanding as opposed to condemnation and criticism, just as we might with somebody else. If I allow myself to speak to myself in those kinds of ways, why wouldn't I allow somebody else to speak to me in those kinds of ways as well? So I hope you're understanding how all of this ultimately results in positive relationships with other people, because it has to start with ourselves first. While I'm showing you these, I'd love to see the affirmations that you perhaps use. Maybe you've got a couple favorites that you'd like to share with us in that chat box. One of the first, and these are just some of my favorites, I love myself exactly as I am. Not as I was 10 years ago or 10 years from now, if I should have, could have, would have, but exactly as I am right in this moment is pretty important. I choose myself today and every day, so I choose myself first. And this is again about prioritizing what I need in any given day. Self-love is asking yourself what you need every day, then making sure you receive it. And I think many of us struggle to do that as a priority. We do it for those around us. We do it for our jobs, for our families, for our friends, even perhaps, but we don't necessarily do it for ourselves. I choose to be the most confident version of myself. And there's a saying, fake it till you make it. And this is a suggestion towards that. If you're struggling on any given day, just fake it. Choose to be the most confident version of yourself, and amazing things can start to happen. I am beautiful, successful, and confident. Reminding yourself of that. We tell that to other people all the time. How often do we tell that to ourselves? And I love and appreciate myself as I am in this moment. Okay. And that's maybe using a little bit of mindfulness to bring it right into this moment. How am I right in this moment? And these are some affirmations that you can use or not use. There's thousands available. You can access these in lots of different ways. A simple Google search. You can buy a deck of them. You can make them up as you go along. I'm really hoping you're dropping some in the chat box as we go as well.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi.
I just want to share some of the affirmations that I'm seeing here in the chat box.
Brilliant.
Marianne says, I am happy, I am healthy, I am healing. Kenna says, I'm unique, precious, and priceless. Mitchell says, God said, love your enemy. I did so and loved myself. Nolutando says, tomorrow's problems belong to tomorrow's me. Keribone says, I'm the best, I'm smart, I'm unique, and I love myself in this version, in every version.
Brilliant. Those are great. I like the one about tomorrow's problems belong to tomorrow's me. I really like that, because we spend so much energy worrying about what's coming tomorrow and not focusing on what we need to do today. So that's a really helpful one as well. I can see a comment there saying, but faking it can be absolutely exhausting. Yes, correct. Hopefully, though, you won't have to fake it for particularly long. So the idea is that if you act as if we take the action, then the feeling follows. So very often we wait to feel like something, and we're just kind of passively waiting for that to happen. Unfortunately, it's probably not going to. We need to take an action. At that point, pretty much any action, just to start us moving forward. If you're still faking it weeks and months down the line, then something else needs to shift. But certainly just to take that action really starts to help. I know I use that often. So right now I'm completely overwhelmed with sort of work demands and personal demands. And then, of course, got sick, just to add to that little equation. And in my head, I'm going, just do 3 things. It doesn't even matter which 3. And that includes my house. When I walk into a room, just put 3 things away. Just sort out 3 things. Because that action creates action. Energy creates energy. As soon as we feel overwhelmed and we get stuck, then we just get more and more overwhelmed because we're not doing anything. So that's what I mean by fake it till you make it. Just take the action, because the feeling will follow the action. Unfortunately, we can't just wait for that feeling to come. So I hope I gave a little bit more insight on that statement that I made. Okay, great. Please keep those comments and those suggestions and those insights coming. Okay, so lastly here, we want to explore our interests. And just as I mentioned that movie, and I hope you're all going to go and watch it, what are your interests? Or do we just give ourselves over in relationships? So our partners are into fishing, so we want to fish. Or our partners are into cooking, so we want to cook. What about our interests? When we put our whole life into a relationship, it becomes pretty tricky, because it's putting a lot of pressure on that relationship to be everything. And I don't think that any one person can ever be everything. We're supposed to be getting our emotional, social, spiritual needs met from a variety of different people. It's why community is so important. So yes, we all want that one main person, that special person, that partnership, but that one person can't be everything. We're supposed to be getting those needs met in a variety of places. So when we put our whole lives into that one person, it's too much pressure on that relationship. Secondly, if you lose that relationship, you then lose everything. You lose your friendship circle, you lose your hobbies and interests, you lose your financial security, you lose your home, you lose everything. Whereas if you had kept your life and built your life and maintained a level of interdependence, not necessarily independence, but interdependence. I have what's mine and you have what's yours, and we have what is ours together. Then if I lose that relationship, of course it's devastating and it's sad and it's all of those things, but I haven't lost everything. I've just lost my relationship. So it's pretty important that we keep our interests and our tribes and our friends and what's important to us, keep that running parallel to your relationships for all the reasons that I've already said. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some insights into building a relationship with yourself. Now, why is this so important? And I probably alluded to some of this already, but it really is about learning to love yourself. Perhaps forgive yourself for some of the not great choices you might have made historically, for some of the things you've done or said or choices you've made. We need to learn to express ourselves, empower ourselves, value ourselves, trust ourselves. Okay, this is all about building that relationship with yourself first. More specifically, though, it's about knowing what our non-negotiables are. Whenever I do couples counseling, which, just to let you know, is the type of counseling that I certainly find the hardest, because you have to balance two sets of needs plus the needs of the relationship. So there's actually 3 elements, not 1 or 2. There's 3. And that obviously makes it much more difficult to sort of honor 3 elements as opposed to 1. But what I always say when we talk about couples and couple therapy or relationship therapy is, what are your non-negotiables? If I know myself, I know what is fundamentally important to me. I need to know what I will not compromise on. People always say relationships are about compromise. Ideally not. Ideally, they're about collaboration, where person 1 and person 2 are coming together and they're collaborating to create a third thing that meets both of their needs. If I am consistently compromising all the time, I'm giving up on what's important to me over and over and over again, ultimately, with the best will in the world, that's going to create resentment and a sense of unfairness and me not getting my needs met, what's important to me. So knowing your non-negotiables is about coming into a relationship, knowing the things that you are not prepared to compromise on. And those might be really obvious ones, like I don't want to be hit. I don't want to be called names. Okay, now these are obviously your absolutely most basic non-negotiables. Beyond that, you can get some different ones. So one of mine was always, I will always work. I will never not work. I might reduce how much I work if that's financially possible, but I will never not work because work is important to me. I love it and I want the independence that comes with it. I will always have my own bank account. That's a non-negotiable for me. I've got a funny one. I cannot be in a relationship with someone, even friends with somebody who is rude to serving staff, to petrol attendants or waitresses or whoever it might be. It's something that I cannot abide. And if you are rude or unkind, I cannot be in a relationship with you. It's a non-negotiable. So we all have them, and we probably have several of them. What's important is to know what they are. And as soon as the relationship puts pressure on those non-negotiables, the suggestion would be to renegotiate the relationship, not to renegotiate the non-negotiable. If you find yourself letting go of those things in partnerships, in friendships, in relationships with your colleagues, even relationships with your kids or your parents, that becomes a problem because I'm letting go of what's important to me. And if I've built that relationship with myself and I value myself, I'm not going to be prepared to do that. I also need to know, what are my unmet needs? Now, this is where it starts to get a little bit psychobabblish, so forgive me if I struggle to explain this, and please ask questions for clarity in that chat box. I will pause after this to check if I perhaps haven't made any sense. We all come out of our childhoods with a set of unmet needs. If you have an awesome childhood, as close to perfect as you can get, then you might have one or two. If you have a truly atrocious, abusive, traumatizing childhood, you're going to have dozens and dozens of unmet needs. But we all have at least one or two. Now, those unmet needs might be to be able to trust or feel trusted, to be able to connect at all, to have a voice, to feel empowered, and so on and so on and so on and so on. That list is infinitum. We're supposed to be given all of these things in our childhoods. And when we don't get given them for whatever reason, because our parents had to work 3 jobs and were a bit absent, because our parents had their own trauma and now we're dealing with intergenerational trauma, because they were focused on survival because of severe poverty, who knows? For whatever reason, those needs may not have been met. Now, I come into my adult life and I still have those unmet needs. I still don't have them. What we tend to do is try and chase those things out of our romantic partners. Sometimes even out of our friends or out of our superiors at work. So let's say, for example, that my unmet need is to be trusted. Okay. So now I've come into my adulthood and I desperately need someone to just trust me because I haven't had that experience as a child. But now I don't go and marry someone who's freely able to trust me. Ironically, what I do is I go and marry somebody who is unable to trust me because of their own damage. And that's what I was saying earlier about damage attracts damage. And we have this perfect puzzle piece that fits so perfectly, but is so incredibly unhelpful. When I know what my unmet needs are, I'm able to go into relationships with those things as a non-negotiable so that I can make sure that I get what I need from that relationship and I don't spend my adult life trying to chase it out of people who are unable or unwilling to give it to me. Ironically, even if I find somebody who is able to give it to me and they do give it to me, it still doesn't feel good enough because I was supposed to get it from mom or dad or my caregivers. I'm not supposed to get it from my adult relationships. So the key here is actually to grieve whatever it is you didn't get in your childhood, to identify what that is. And that may be about counseling, journaling, reading, identifying what those unmet needs are, grieving them. You didn't get them in your childhood, and that's not okay. And then being able to give them to yourself. Again, back to why that relationship with yourself is so profoundly important in terms of being able to have meaningful connections with other people. Did that make sense? Are there any questions on that before I move on? It can be a bit of a mouthful to explain. Okay, I don't see any questions. I just see wonderful affirmations. I am motivated, focused, and capable. I like that one, but I don't see any questions on this idea of unmet needs, so I'm going to trust that I explained that sufficiently. Okay, let's have a look at knowing what you like. And I've probably spoken about this topic enough, or this point enough, but we need to know what we like and really not to surrender that. And that's as simple as, what do we like to eat? What do we like to do for fun? What do we want to spend our money on? What's important to us? Really being able to know that and honor that. We need to maintain that life outside of the relationship. And we need to know our own worth. If I don't have a sense of personal worth, that I am valuable simply because I am, if I don't know my worth, I'm going to allow for relationships that are not okay. I'm going to allow myself to be in relationships that are toxic, perhaps even abusive. And obviously, nobody wants that. So we have to know our worth. And maybe that's about doing affirmations. Again, getting some counseling, writing down all the positive things people say about you. There's an awesome exercise where you get a big piece of newspaper roll, the paper that they used to print newspapers on back in the day. And you get a huge roll like that, or you even stick a whole bunch of A4s together, whatever, it doesn't matter. And you trace an outline of yourself onto that large piece of paper. And every time someone gives you a compliment or says something good about yourself, or every time you look at yourself in the mirror and go, oh, I look nice today, you write that down on that piece of paper. And you look at that and you refer to that as often as you need to. You could even do it digitally if you didn't want it, on your wall somewhere if that felt too exposing. So it's really about knowing your worth and acting as if, again, I'm back to the concept of acting as if you are valuable, treating yourself the same way you would treat other people. And then we get to this idea of being resolved. And that's a really big word. When I say be resolved, that's really about knowing what your unmet needs are, knowing what your attachment traumas are, knowing what your triggers are. And all of these things start to kind of bleed into each other, but knowing what all those things are so that I am insightful and aware and therefore able to have an insightful relationship that's based on genuine connection and not just sort of trauma bonding because my damage fits with your damage and now we are bonded together and really too frightened to step out of that relationship. So this is why this relationship with yourself, this being resolved, is so very important. Okay, before I move on to attachment, any questions, concerns, insights at this point? If my amazing colleagues could let me know.
Yes, Tracy, we do have a question here, tips on how to grieve those childhood unmet needs.
I'm chuckling because that's such a great question and quite a challenging question as well. So the first task of grief is unfortunately acceptance. So we have to accept that what is lost is lost. And that doesn't matter whether we're talking about having lost a person or a pet or a job or a prized possession or a childhood experience. Whatever we've lost, we have to grieve. And to start that process, we have to accept that it's gone, that it is no longer available to us. And part of doing that, when we're speaking about childhood unmet needs, is accepting that we're never going to get it met. So my childhood was not terrible, but also wasn't perfect. But a part of the work that I had to do was to accept that my mother and my father were unable, for whatever reason, and that actually isn't my problem what the reasons were, for whatever reason, were unable to give me a certain number of things. I had to accept that they were never going to be able, and perhaps that's still an ongoing process for me. Both my parents are now passed. I have no way of having this conversation with them anymore. Even when they were alive, they wouldn't have been receptive to this conversation. So it's about accepting that I'm not ever going to get those needs met. And that can be challenging to do, obviously, because it's not fair. And you're supposed to have got those things. We're supposed to have all had that chocolate box childhood. Unfortunately, very few of us actually got that, but we were supposed to get it. And it's okay to be angry about the unfairness of that. It's okay to kind of bargain with that. What if this? What if that? It's a normal grieving process. But ultimately, we need to get to that point of acceptance. I didn't get it. That wasn't about me. That's about the shortcomings of my parents for whatever reason. And we can even give them grace and understanding. Who knows why they were unable to give those things? But also, I'm not ever going to get them. Because if they were able to give it to us, they would have. And now that we're adults and they're older adults, they're not going to suddenly become able unless they have, they go to therapy or they have some major, insight moment and they change significantly. You're probably not ever going to get it from them. And that acceptance can be difficult. What makes it easier to accept, though, is that I might not be able to get it from them, but I can give it to myself. I can learn to give those things to myself. And I'm going to give you some suggestions at the end of this on reading you can do to kind of continue this conversation. But I hope I answered that pretty difficult, challenging question sufficiently enough. Any other questions at this time?
You have one, Tracy.
Okay.
How do you build a relationship with yourself when you don't know yourself the way you're supposed to?
Okay. Another awesome question. So I think that's about dating yourself. Now, before you all laugh at me, when I'm trying to get to know another person, whether that's a romantic partner or whether that's a friend, what do? You hang out and you do different things together. You go to movies or restaurants or, you go for walks or whatever it is you do. You do pretty much the same thing when you're trying to get to know yourself. I have to date myself. I have to experiment. And again, I'm referencing this movie, this Runaway Bride movie. And right at the end, you'll see she's experimenting with how she likes her eggs. Does she like them scrambled, fried, poached, boiled? How do we like our eggs? Do you like steak or chicken? Do you like romantic movies or action movies? Do you like a walk in the park or a walk on the beach? What do you like? You've got to start dating yourself to figure those things out. And that might be really a process of hit and miss. Trying this activity, trying that activity. Oh, I don't like that. Well, I do like this. So it's about dating yourself. I know that sounds a little bit cheesy, but that's really what it is. And being comfortable on your own to allow yourself that. To go to a coffee shop by yourself and read a book and go, actually, I like lattes and not cappuccinos, and I like romantic novels. I don't like, true crime or whatever. So it's really about dating yourself and experimenting until you get more confident. And that obviously changes as you go through life. What I enjoyed doing 20 years ago isn't the same anymore. So I have to keep allowing that exploration. And when we get married and we have kids perhaps and life gets crazy, like I'm in a place now where my kids, they're both these like radical overachievers, swimming at a level that you can't even imagine. It's all weekend, full day, double day, galas and training all the time. And I often say to myself, where's my life gone? Like what happened to my life? And then I have to stop and go, okay, just carve it out here. Just make sure you watch the movie you want to watch on TV and not the garbage that they want to watch. Or, we go to the restaurants that I like, or whatever, those little things, we have to keep carving that out. It isn't that we do it once and then it's done for our lives. It's going to keep getting challenged by work, by marriage, by kids, by our health, by all kinds of different things. Our losses, it's all going to get challenged by those things. So it's an ongoing process. Any other questions or fabulous insights in that chat box before I move on?
I do have another one, Tracy. How to deal with a parent that does not give you the opportunity to be heard whilst not being rude or defensive.
Yes. So another great question. This work that we need to do on ourselves, we need to accept that usually we will do it on our own. We'll do it in the absence of the people that have caused that hurt in the first place. So when I had to resolve my relationship with my parents, I didn't do it with my parents. They had no knowledge at all. I did it in therapy. I did it in books, in education, because I happen to be a therapist. So lots of the education I've done helped me. But I never had the conversation with them for the exact same reason. They weren't available. My father was angry and aggressive. My mother was just shut down and unavailable. So there was no way I was going to have this conversation with them. And even if I had, it would have ended badly, and I would have walked away feeling like everything was my fault. So this work that we do is not with the people that have hurt us. Because if they were able to give us that, they would already have done that. If they had that capacity, that ability, you wouldn't be sitting with the unmet need. So they can't give you what they can't give you. They don't know what they don't know, so to speak. So it's not about trying to find a way to have the conversation with them that's going to be successful. It's about having the conversation with somebody else, a friend, a minister, a rabbi, a therapist, a journal, whatever that is for you, a tree, a dog. It doesn't matter what you're talking to, actually. That you're having that conversation somewhere else where you're getting perspective, because they can't give you what they can't give you, and they don't know what they don't know. Okay, and to give them grace as well, there's a reason that they have that inability to meet your needs. This is intergenerational. So they didn't get something. What they didn't get, they can't give, and so on and so forth. So it does become kind of an intergenerational thing until someone goes, okay, enough. I'm going to be the generation that does the work. And I'm going to be the generation that resolves these things so that I can have meaningful connections and I don't pass this on to my children. Okay, any more questions, or should I move on?
All good for now, Tracy. You can carry on.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so let's have a look at attachment. So attachment is this profoundly important thing that we are increasingly coming to understand. It isn't a new idea. It's been around since the 50s or 60s or so. But what it says is that when we are born, as I said earlier, we are completely helpless. And our attachment to our primary caregivers, usually our mothers, although that's increasingly changing, sets up a working script, a narrative, a set of internal rules about how all our relationships are going to be. So this attachment is this absolute bonding between two people. It gives us a secure base from which to operate. It's a special relationship where we get our needs met. So the most profound example, the most profound learning I ever had about this was when I was still training as a social worker a couple hundred years ago, and I had to go to an orphanage for one of my placements. And I walked in, I was with the senior social worker, and there was a couple walking around looking to adopt a baby. And these were all babies. They were all sort of a couple months old at best. And the couple walked around and they said to the social worker, "These babies are all so well behaved." And she turned around, and she'd been doing this for a very long time, and she said, "Babies cannot behave well or badly. Babies are just babies trying to get their needs met. And they've stopped crying because they know there's no point crying. If they cry, nobody's going to come. They've given up trying to get those needs met." It's at that point that I understood attachment and understood unmet needs. We get that comfort when I need something and my parent or my caregiver is able to give it to me. Then I have comfort and I experience care, and I'm taught how to have lasting, meaningful connections with other human beings. In the absence of this attachment, relationships become very, very difficult. So I would encourage you to explore attachment and your attachment styles and read about it or get into counseling, because it really can change the way you view your relationships. What we know for sure is that emotionally healthy people, or those of us who are lucky enough to have enjoyed a secure attachment, we turn to other people to get our emotional needs met. When we feel sad or lonely or angry or scared or tired, we turn to people to fill that cup. Those of us that weren't so lucky, that are a little bit emotionally unhealthy or insecurely attached, we turn to stuff. And stuff can often be drugs, alcohol, pharmaceuticals, gambling, gaming, technology, work, money, success, food, shopping, all of these things that for a moment at least make us feel better, but don't really fill that void of connection. So one of the things you can start to look for in your own life in terms of identifying triggers is to go, am I turning to stuff? Food, alcohol, pharmaceuticals, work, money. Am I turning to stuff to fill that void, or am I turning to people? If you're turning to stuff, that's information for you. I need to work on those basic attachments. I need to resolve those things so that I am better able to turn to people, because stuff is never going to be able to give us what we ultimately need. Now, this little model is another great way to understand our triggers. For those of you that want to look it up, it's called REBT, or Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. It's a huge mouthful for a super simple thing, but that's what it is if you do want to have a look for it. And what this tells us is that we all come into our lives, into this present moment, with a history. We all have a huge history that's made up of every relationship, every school, church, mosque, synagogue, every brownies camp I went to, swimming tour I did, every piece of my history, every movie I watched is sitting here in my history. Now, when an event happens, I don't engage with that event neutrally. I engage with it through a filter of my history. So I think about that event through a filter of my history. And then I decide about that event. Then I decide how I'm going to feel. And then obviously a set of behaviors come out. So let me give you an example. If I'm waiting for lunch for my friend and she's late, and I'm phoning, no answer. I'm getting more and more irritated. An hour later, she rocks up. And I absolutely explode. In that moment, I need to stop and go, hang on a second. Is the intensity of my reaction about this moment? Or is this about how I've interpreted the event based on my history? If you were the kid who got left at school waiting for mom or for dad or for the transport to fetch you, and they were late, often, and you were sitting there and it was getting dark and cold, and the caretaker was irritated because he wanted to go home, and you were embarrassed and hungry and a bit scared, if that was your life experience, when your friend is an hour late, it isn't about your friend being an hour late. It's about what's being triggered for you. When we have these intense emotional reactions to relatively small things, that is information. Okay, I need to have a look at what piece of my history is informing this interpretation and process that, because I'm damaging my present day relationships because I'm overreacting, so to speak, to this present event, but I'm not overreacting to my history. I hope that makes sense. So we use this to get information about what our emotional, relational triggers are, so that we're able to resolve those and not put them in our present day relationships. So we take this together with knowledge of our unmet needs, together with knowledge of our non-negotiables, and you see how we're starting to position ourselves to have meaningful, honest, open relationships that meet most of our needs. They're never going to meet them all, but meet most of our needs. Okay, enough of the big fancy psycho babble mumbo jumbo. Let's get into the routines that actually support family relationships. And again, when I say family, I use that word in the broadest possible sense. This could be colleagues, it could be friendships, it could be single parents, whatever it is. This is how we support relationships. We need to create a warm atmosphere. There is nothing worse than walking into a home or an office or getting into a car even where the atmosphere is grim, where people are angry and irritated. Nobody can talk. Nobody can relax. It needs to be a warm atmosphere, a home in the fullest sense of that word. Cell phones, screens are the demise of human relationships. They are the demise of connection. If you want to have good relationships, get off your devices. I would suggest having family rules where there are no screens in the car, at the table, or in bedrooms. That there's quite serious limits to how much TV and screen time is allowed. Because as soon as those screens go on, you have disconnected from all the human beings in your current space. And it really is the demise of communication, and it's the demise of connection. So screens got to go. Partner time or date night. If you want to help the child, you help the parents. Family systems cannot be okay if the parents are not okay. The parents cannot be okay if they don't prioritize their relationship. Their relationship cannot be okay if they don't prioritize themselves. So in short, if I fall apart, my kids are going to suffer. So we have to create time to prioritize that original unit. Whoever the parents are, mom and dad or auntie and cousin or whoever it is, right? Who are the primary adults in that family system have to be able to prioritize their own well-being. And then we also need dedicated kid time. Time with each of our children individually. Because my kids are both girls and they're a year apart only. And it's super simple to lump them together. Come on, girls. But actually, they're very different people. They like different things. They have totally different personalities. I have to spend time with them individually. Small routines like family pizza night, family whatever night, games night, burger night, walk in the park night. It's relevant what it is. But that consistency gives kids a sense of predictability, security. I know what's coming next. My life is stable. I am safe. So those small routines create an enormous sense of stability. We need talk time. When in your day, every day, is there realistic space for people to talk to you? When are you not in motion? Not trying to travel somewhere or work or cook or wash dishes, or when are you available for communication? That needs to be clearly communicated. People know this is when we talk. For me, it's bedtime. I spend 15 minutes a night with each of my daughters at bedtime. That's talk time. If we listen to them when they are small, they will talk to us when they are big. When the things become important, we have to listen to the My Little Pony and the Spider-Man nonsense when they are small. So when they are big, the important things will also be shared. Talking spoon is a great tradition. It's exactly that. It's a spoon. And at the table, each at a table ideally, everyone gets a turn with the spoon. When I have the spoon, I give my highs and lows for the day. Nobody interrupts me, but it allows me to be seen and heard and appreciated. And we give time, not gifts. Being present, give experiences, show up for each other. Gifts are gifts. They bring joy for a moment. But time, memories, experiences, that creates bonds and attachments that last forever. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to finish the deck and then I'll stay online for any questions that might come up after that. When we're talking about communicating, there's a great way to do this. And this is a technique that comes from Imago. And again, there's a list you can look up at the end of the deck. We want to mirror what the person is saying to us. Because I've got this filter in place where I'm filtering what you're saying to me through my own experiences. I'm not really hearing what you're saying. I'm hearing my version of what you said. So I need to check it out. You're saying 1, 2, 3. Did I get it right? Did I actually hear you? Is there any more? I want you to know that I've heard you. I validate what you've said. It makes sense to me because I can empathize with you. I've also felt like that before, perhaps. That's how we communicate. And then you say your piece, and they hopefully do the same thing back again. When we are doing this, we are genuinely able to hear what the person is saying and not our version of what we think the person is saying, because that is where miscommunication sits. It sits in this filter because I'm filtering and you're filtering and nobody is actually hearing what the other person is really saying. So when you try this exercise out, and it can feel a bit cumbersome in the beginning, and when you're fighting with someone, it's quite difficult to do. But if you try and practice it and it becomes more normal in your relationships, it really goes a long way. These are those books and suggestions that I keep alluding to. I will share the presentation with Kaelo. They will get it out to you, so you will be able to look these up in your own time. And thank you so much for time and attention. I hope it's been helpful. I hope I've shared a little bit of insight on one or two things that might be useful. I'm happy to stay on the line if there are any questions or insights. Ask away. For those of you that need to get on with your busy days, have an awesome day further. Thanks for being here. Bye.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I think this was a truly, truly insightful session. It's important to take away from the session that I think relationships with ourselves, our partners, our families, our friends are the pivotal part of our lives. And it's crucial that we invest time to understand relationships. Thank you so much to everybody for joining today's session. As Tracy mentioned, we will make the slides available to download from our website, and a recording of this webinar will be posted on our YouTube page in the coming days. Thank you again for all of your engagement. What a wonderful team who's joined the webinar today. We look forward to seeing you again next month. Please do keep your eyes peeled for our next webinar reminder, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks again.